God is smarter than we are, and we need to get over it. In his job is he gets to be God, and he gets to allow things to happen. Sometimes he may cause it. Sometimes he may just knowingly something's going to play out that we don't like. And like I described before, we may get mad at him. We don't understand it. We think we're being picked on. We don't like it at all. But God in his sovereignty is deciding to let that play out. That means he's involved in it. That means it's a blessing. Because even though we don't like it at the time, there's a bigger picture involved that he gets, that he understands that we don't.
You are now listening to the podcast where authors inspire listeners to become authors, the Going North Podcast. I'm your host, certified self-leadership trainer, best-selling author, and book enthusiast, Dom Brightman. And you're going to be listening to a different author that will inspire you to join the business of immortality, known as authorship. Now let the fun begin. Today's episode is sponsored by book number 2 from Dominic Dom Brightman, Stay the Course, The Elite Performer's 7 Secret Keys to Sustainable Success. It is the field guide to help unleash the elite performer that is inside of you. Cop it today on Amazon.com or heading over to dombrightman.com and snag it in book, ebook, and audiobook, so that way you can take it on the go and get yourself on the go to your northbound success. And today on GMP, the Great, Glorious, and Glamorous, the Going North Podcast, we got another super special, awesome human for you today, courtesy of the wonderful site you know and love if you've been listening to this podcast over the last 200 plus episodes. It's the Going North Podcast, and we're special guest today, courtesy of podmatch.com, baby. That's right, indeed. That wonderful site where podcast guests get to connect with podcast hosts. And if they're cool, they're in. And let me tell you a bit about today's guest, because it's cooler than 2 cucumbers indeed. Because he's a fellow believer, y'all. That's right, indeed. A fellow believer, as well as an empty nester as well. And an empty nester parent. And my goodness, my man's actually been doing a lot of good work over the years, because my man used to be in the consumer packaged good industry to handle the good old bills of the day-to-day. And then he was also a volunteer advocate for people with disabilities back during the Barack Obama era when he was president. So my goodness, so we got an interesting man with a bunch of interesting stories and a whole lot of inspiration and motivation. So let's give it up for Mr. CB. And we're not talking about the quarterback, but we're talking about Clay Boatright. How you doing today, Clay?
I'm doing great, Dom. I appreciate it. It's a beautiful night. Get to spend my evening with you. It doesn't get any better than that, man.
Yes, indeed. Better and not butter, some would say.
That's it.
Right, indeed. So my goodness, as with all introductions, they're not allowed to be 17.5 years long, and I probably covered, I don't know, maybe 0.3 minutes of my man Clay and what he does. So my goodness, mind filling in any cavities and let folks know who is the wonderful Clay Boatright. It's your first time here.
I will do that, and I appreciate that. So, short story, born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, lived in St. Louis for a while, Houston, now in Dallas, Texas. And I wrote a book recently, and it was kind of a memoir, or it is a memoir. And the title of it is God's Plan, Our Circus. And the reason I picked this title is I have been uniquely blessed with some pretty bizarre challenges over my life, especially during my adult life. So I'll go through the early part. Like I said, born and raised in Memphis, went to University of Memphis, got married, moved to St. Louis, and soon after moving to St. Louis, my late wife had Hodgkin's disease, which is a form of lymph node cancer. So so here we are, 25, 24 years old, going through chemo, and wasn't used to that. And she got through it well, survived, and they said, hey, wait a few years to have some kids. So we did. About 8.5 years later, after 8.5 years of fun, just the two of us, so we had our first. Her name is Blair. She's the oldest. Traditional kid, always smiling from the day she was born. Happiest kid you'd ever meet. Still to this day, 26 years old, still smiling every day. Then 3 years later, we had our twins. And Blair, our oldest, was, like I say, very uniquely easy kid. And we kind of knew the odds of lightning striking twice on the same crib would be a little difficult or be surprising. And right off the bat, we had some unique challenges. So our twins were born. Their names are Paige and Mia. And they were born about 7 weeks early. And it took a little slow to development. And then we just noticed some things, just some gaps going on, particularly when we compared to their older sister. Then we got to the 24-month well baby visit. So you go in there to the pediatrician, and they check, make sure everything's okay. And we're there at the pediatrician, and Carol, my late wife, I think she was holding Paige, and I was holding Mia. And we're going through this developmental milestone checklist. You got like 25 questions you ask. We get to the bottom of the checklist for each child we're holding, and we look at each other. We went, neither one of us has checked anything off the list. I'm like, well, that's probably not a good thing. So the doctor came in and he said, yeah, there's something going on here. So he pointed us towards Easter seals, and they did some assessments, and they came back with what is now referred to as intellectual disabilities and autism. Back in those days, the official medical term was mental retardation. We don't use those words anymore. That'll come up again in a minute, but it was the mental retardation and autism. So that kind of launched us on a whole new path that we had not anticipated. So I referred to my family as the Boatright Circus. So it was a little crazy. Paige and Mia, well, I'll bring you ahead to now. So today they're 23. They do not speak. They need help with what's referred to as all activities of daily living, ADL. So they need help with everything bathroom related, everything bedroom related, getting dressed, getting undressed. They can feed themselves, which is great, and they are mobile. I used to say, hey, the great thing is Paige and me are mobile. Big challenge, Paige and me are mobile. So we used to have we called it elopement is the official term, but they've kind of calmed down on some of that. So their disability is pretty extreme. So yeah, it was a little wild raising the kids, and just having experiences and meltdowns and challenges and arguments with the wife, and trying to raise Blair as best we could, the oldest one, and got to about their age 4. So 2 years after the diagnosis, it was 2004, and we were having a rough night. It was a Friday night, specifically Friday night at home, and Paige and me were having meltdowns. They were having a rough night. They were upset. We couldn't figure out why. Blair, their big sister, was not happy. She was upset. Carol didn't cry. She just got mad. She wouldn't cry at you. She'd rip your throat out, but she wouldn't cry at you. But so she was mad. Yeah. So I did what any good Christian father, husband, leader would do in a crisis moment like that. I went to bed. I'm like, you know what? I can't fix it. So everybody will be here tomorrow. We'll figure it out then. So I went to bed, and I'm laying there on bed, and I'll be honest with you, I was mad at God. I really was. So when Carol and I got married, I was born a Baptist, and I went to church maybe once every 2 or 3 years, not heavily engaged. My wife was second pew on the left, Methodist every Sunday, and that's what the habit we adopted. So we had been going to church every week for years, and we're faithful and loyal and believed in God, worship Christ. So all the things you're supposed to do. And here I am now with a family I did not sign up for. And I'm laying in bed mad at God. And I thought, and it's part of a prayer, but also being mad at God. I said, God, why'd you do this to Paige and Mia? Okay. Have them have disabilities as severe. Why'd you do this to Paige and Mia? And to be blunt, why'd you do it to me? This is not what I signed up for. And that question was on my mind as I fell asleep. Is why'd you do this? I don't usually go to bed mad. I mean, a few times I've done it. It's like the next morning I wake up almost madder than the night before. It's like the emotions marinate overnight. So I wake up, I'm ready. I'm gonna kick some butt, right? Yeah, we're gonna take it on. And that next morning, that Saturday morning, totally different. Saturday morning, I woke up. I was excited. I was pumped. It was like fresh wind blowing into my lungs. I was ready to take on the world. I was excited and happy and upbeat. And the very first words that entered my head were to help people like Paige and Mia, which I immediately interpreted as to help people with severe disabilities like they have. Help people like Paige and Mia. Again, help people with severe disabilities like them. As sure as we are sitting here on this podcast, given my priorities at the time, focus on work, focus on family, all that type of stuff. There's no way I would have come up with that on my own. Absolutely no way on God's green earth I would have cooked that up on my own. There was no doubt, absolutely no doubt in my mind at that moment that I fell asleep asking God a question, and he sent the Holy Spirit and answered it. So I'm laying there in bed, realizing what's happened. And really two great things had happened. Number one, it happened. Number two, I had the wherewithal to realize it. And I thought, wow, okay. And now what do you do? So I did what millions of people do every day when they have a question on what to do. They have a question about something. I got out of bed, went to the computer, and I Googled it. I sat down at my computer, and again, using the vernacular at the time. So people who are sensitive on the language, I'm going to ask you to indulge me. I'm using the vernacular at that time. So I typed 4 words, their diagnosis: mental retardation, Dallas help. Enter. I came on an organization I'd never heard of before called the Arc of Dallas. I'm looking at their website, and I said, well, this looks like a place that helps people like Paige and me. We'll start there. So I reached out to them on Monday morning, and I'm going to compress the next 16 years into 30 seconds. So I reached out to them on Monday morning, and they said they were looking for some new board members. I'm like, really? Never heard of you until 48 hours ago. Went, met with them, joined their board, became their next board president. And during that process, I'm meeting other families, understanding the issues families like mine are facing that I haven't even faced yet, learning the system. A few years after that, got involved in the state level organization called the Arc of Texas. So I'm now meeting with politicians, and I'm going down to Austin, our state capital, and testifying at Senate and House committees on disability related stuff. So I'm meeting, again, legislators, and I'm meeting senior leadership at Health and Human Services. And along this way, I'm learning about the system, and I'm learning what services are out there for people. And I'm, again, hearing people's stories, and I'm connecting them with service providers, because over this time, I was meeting everybody. So at some point, if you were in the intellectual developmental disability community of Texas, I probably bet you, and you knew my story. So I was connecting people with services. Then a few years into that, a gentleman named Barack Obama got elected president. And he appointed me to a presidential advisory committee in Washington, D.C. for 2 years. So I go through all that to share that within the course of about 9 years, I went from being mad at God on a Friday night to becoming about as strong in understanding the Texas developmental disability support system and helping people get connected as much as they could, and then getting appointed to a national advisory committee to try and help guide us on a national level, all in a fairly short period of time. And it all started because I was mad at God one night, asked him a question, and he answered it. So that's how people know me. I'm blessed to know thousands of people. 95% of them have absolutely no idea what I did for a living. Absolutely none. They don't know how I paid my bills, but everybody knew what I did for free, because that's what God brought me into this thing for. But that's why he gave me my unique family. So that's the short, well, probably wasn't that short, but that's the background on the background on why we're having a conversation, or at least the first part of it.
Hey, it's all good. It's all good indeed. And glad you're able to make it to the other side of, I guess, the end of or at least the end of one tunnel. I guess there's other tunnels you've been having to go through after all of that. So my goodness, like so many things to unpack there. Like my goodness, especially being able to be caught up by president of the whole US of A at the time. So my goodness, how did that even happen? Like was this campaign like going through, I guess, that town or whatever when you're going through the ARC program or whatever? Like how did that even happen? How did you get involved with that?
Sure. So the way, and from a little background standpoint, when it comes to politics, I am an enthusiastically passionate independent. Okay. Actually, when people get partisan and they start preaching partisan politics, whether it's Democrat or Republican, the hair on the back of my neck kind of stands up, because, and this is now political theology according to Clay. So I believe I actually believe the Bible. I actually believe the Bible when it says God created everybody. Okay, everybody's everybody. So God created everybody, and He, by design, put each one of us in our mama's wombs, and He knew where we would come from. He knew the experiences that we would have over the course of our life. And when you bring that into politics, our opinions, and really our opinion on anything, but our opinions are based on what? They're based on our experience. They're based on our experience and what we've learned. Well, if God is implanting us and kicking us off, knowing each of us is going to have a very different array of experiences, then He must be okay and certainly knows that we're going to have different points of view on stuff. And again, He loves all of us the same, right? So that's why when we get into politics and all those kind of things, I may disagree with somebody because my experiences have led me to a different point of view. But out of my respect and appreciation and love for God, I'm obligated to respect and appreciate and love people who have very different opinions of mine. Not because I think they're great, but because I think God's great. And He's the one who created them with the same passion that He created me. So having said all that, I'm trying to remember what year it was. Probably about 2006, I guess. I was at home and had the Tonight Show on in the background, and so there's Jay Leno, and all of a sudden I hear him talking about some senator who was on the show, had written a book, and the senator had been at Rick Warren's Saddleback Church in California. And Rick Warren is the author of Purpose Driven Life, and I'm a big fan of that book, Purpose Driven Life. I turned my chair around and go, what's going on? I see this guy named Barack Obama, kind of a strange sounding name. And he sits down, he's talking to Jay, and they're having a good banter. And my wife walks in the room, and I said, you see that guy? She said, yeah. I said, he's going to be the first Black president of the United States. And she's like, all right, then. Kept on going. About a year later, they had an information session because he got into the race. He ran for president, obviously, got into the race. They had an information session. I went, listened to the information session. Keeping in mind, I live in a very Republican area, and I tend to vote Republican because in our area, if you're going to influence anything, you vote in the Republican primary because that's where it happens. And I line up on the right side on a few issues, so not a big deal. But anyway, so I go to this information session, and I'm learning about it. I'm like, guy seems pretty normal, seems a little brighter than the average Joe on the street. So I made a little contribution, thinking that he's probably not going to win the nomination, much less the presidency, but he's going to be a player for a while. So I kicked into it, and got a call a while later from the guy who was fundraising. He said, "Hey Clay, this was months later." He said, "Obama's going to be in town for a fundraiser." I'm like, okay, a lunch. I was like, okay, so I went to that, and after that, I'm like, okay, I'm getting kind of interested. Then one day I was at work and I looked on my computer, and he saw that he had started a platform in his campaign for people with disabilities, or a disability platform. And he had like 12 things outlined, that policies and things he was going to pursue relative to the disability community. I'm like, that's a thing. I'm looking at that. And I jumped over to the website of his competitor, John McCain, who's a great guy, certainly outstanding guy. I looked at that. Didn't see anything. I'm like, okay, that's curious. So, well, at least of the two, the guy I've been kind of looking at for a while is speaking my language. So I sent a note to like the website, and a couple of days later, got a call from the guy who was heading up their disability campaign, a guy named Kareem Dale. And he said they were putting together a group of people across the country to kind of take the message out to the disability community. And they didn't have anybody in Texas. I'm like, wow, isn't that convenient? I live in Texas. So that's so got involved there. As a result of that, got invited to the inauguration, which surprised the heck out of me. So got invited to the inauguration. A couple years later, would have been 1990, I guess. No, I'm sorry, 2010. Was the 20-year anniversary of the American with Disabilities Act. And I was invited to a ceremony on the South Lawn of the White House. Went there. So it was July in Washington, and I'm wearing a suit. That's not a good look. It was a little warm, but they had a ceremony, so I was there. And a couple of days later, I was attending a disability seminar in town and ran into Mr. Dale, who I who had worked with on the campaign. And we'd never met before, so we chatted for a minute, and I thanked him for the invitations. And I said, hey, if you ever need anything, any help, give me a call. Okay. But 2 or 3 months later, my phone rang, and it said unknown on the caller ID. I'm like, okay, this is probably somebody selling something, but we'll see. And I answered the phone, and the guy on the other end said, "Hi, is this Clay Boatright?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "My name is Jones. I'm an attorney with the White House." And I'm like, "Oh crap, what did I do?"
Right.
It sounds like trouble. And long story short, he asked me if I'd ever heard of this committee called the President's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities. I said, no, I had not. He said, well, my name had been, he said, would I be interested? And I said, yeah, I guess so. And he said my name had been submitted for it. So if I was interested, I'd go through a vetting process, and that's how I got on that committee. So I was on that for 2 years, and it was interesting. Kind of learning about how Washington works, particularly when it comes to advocacy and policy development and things of that nature. So that was an interesting deal. So I did that for 2 years, and then when that appointment was over, timing was good because in Texas they needed somebody to head up a committee on the advising on the redesign of our support system. So I chaired that for 6 years. So anyway, so that was my kind of big governmental engagements for a while. That was a very long-winded answer to your simple question.
Hey, it's all good because a lot of details are required, especially nowadays in today's political climate, to say the least. And it's good that you actually would be a part of that. So, my goodness, so what was it like being a part of that group, being a volunteer? And if I'm not mistaken, you were like the first one to make a report, at least from your area, from the state of Texas, if I'm not mistaken,
Well,
too.
well, no, the issue on that. So with the President's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities, and I think this is true for a lot of advisory committees in Washington, they have basically one job, and the one job is to issue a report to the president, and it can be on any topic that the committee wants. But the one legislatively defined responsibility is to write this report. So that first year, we did a report on the importance of Medicaid services to people with disabilities. So in the disability world, Medicaid is basically the lifeblood of the system. Back in the, I guess it was the 80s, and it would have been 80s and early 90s, it was decided that Medicaid was going to be the mechanism we were going to use to provide financial support to people with disabilities who needed it. So it's very, very important. So we crafted this report to the president and broke it up into 5 different areas. And as part of each area, each topic discussion, we had a kind of a case study of a family who was affected by that particular issue. And on one of the areas, it was like in-home support services was one of the topics, or in-home services. And actually wound up using my family. And it was the first time in the history of the committee that a sitting member of the committee's story had been used in a report to the president. And in my book, I talk about it, and I said, yeah. And I was very candid. The way I wrote it and the way it was included in the report was very, very candid on the challenges that we had and how the Medicaid services we received benefited our family, literally kept our family together. I talk about how our family would have crumbled, disintegrated without this support. And in the book, I sum it up by saying, most people guard their family challenges with like gold. You don't let anybody know you've got it. I, on the other hand, had my family challenges published and bound in a report to the President of the United States and archived in American history. So being discreet is not my strongest suit. But that was something I learned early on in the whole disability advocacy thing. Was I'm not going to do this. I love Jesus, but I use 4-letter words. So I'm not going to do this half-assed. Okay, right? We're going to go in, we're going to do it all the way. And the only way to do this is I've got to be totally candid. And got to be totally upfront with the challenges we had and challenges of other people going through similar situations.
Ah, that's what I'm talking about indeed. So, speaking of writing and reports, you decided to join the business of immortality with your book, God's Plan, Our Circus. So, my goodness, what helped you get the confidence to write the book, and where did the title come from?
Sure. The so I don't know if it's a fault or a strength, probably both. I spend way too much time on Facebook, right? And this is kind of became my outlet to people need to know my thoughts. So I decided to put it on Facebook, right? Gonna bless everybody. I bless the few hundred people on Facebook friends with my great thoughts. And this, I would tell stories about our family and the kind of the craziness we run into. And many people came back and said, Clay, your family's pretty unique, but you have a very upbeat, very positive. I can find a joke in anything. I can probably find an inappropriate innuendo in just about anything. So I always have kind of a positive attitude. And something along the way. So after the whole, we're talking about the disability things, we got our kids set up. So Blair, the oldest, she went off to college, got her set up out of the house, doing great. We found a wonderful group home for our twins. It was a bit of a challenge to get started, but we got that up and running. So got them out of the house. So we became empty nesters. My wife went back to work for the first time in 20 years in terms of full-time employment. And 6 months after she started her job, she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. So she went through surgeries, thought they got it, turned out they didn't get it, went through 18 months of chemo and ultimately passed away. So the subtitle of the book, God's Plan, Our Circus. So God's plan, I believe our family plan was, or our family life was truly his plan, even though executing it looked more like a circus. So God's Plan, Our Circus. The subtitle is A Family Odyssey Through Autism, which is my children, Death, which was my wife, and Reinvention, which is me. So a family odyssey through autism, death, and reinvention. And I shared with you my testimony about why God created my children with disabilities and placed them as part of my family. There's a second testimony, and it comes after my wife died. So she passed away on February 11th, 2020. Okay, February 11th, 2020. So interestingly enough, think about the timing on that. February 11th, 2020. She never heard the word pandemic. She never heard the word COVID. She missed all of that fun. So she passes away. And 3 days later is what? Valentine's Day, right? February 14th. So Blair had come back from, she was living in Nashville at the time. She came back and for her mom's services, and Valentine's Day, she wanted to go out with her boyfriend, or her now husband. I said, sure, absolutely, go ahead. So my twins again were with the group home that they were in, and Valentine's Day night, I go into the grocery store. It's a Tom Thumb grocery store across the street from my house, right, to get something to eat. And I walk in there and I'm all sad and depressed, right? Here it is, Valentine's Day, and the day meant for the person you love. And this would have been our 33rd Valentine's Day together. And here I am, my best friend, arguably my only friend, really, had just died. I had no idea. She died in our bed. I was holding her head in my hands when she passed away. And I share that story in the book. I'm feeling pretty depressed. I'm very, very down on myself. I'm very down on the future, totally lost. And I'm walking through the store and doing the whole woe is me thing. And I get to aisle 9, hair care aisle. Don't know if that's relevant to the story, but it happened to be where it happened. So standing there in aisle 9, in an instant, faster than a blink of an eye, everything changed. It was like that Saturday morning I talked about a minute ago. I was positive, enthusiastic, smile came across my face. I was ready to just get excited and get after life. And again, I have zero doubt what happened. God picked that moment to reveal 2 things to me with absolute clarity. Number 1, Carol was doing great. She was doing a lot better than the rest of us. She was experiencing what all we Christians aspire for. She was hanging out and worshiping at the throne of God and wasn't sick and wasn't worried about pandemics and wasn't worried about the budget and the bills and all that stuff had to be paid. She was doing great. And then it hit me. God released me from having to mourn my wife, because you don't mourn somebody who's doing better than you are. Now, would I miss her for a while? Of course I would. But you don't mourn somebody who's doing better than you are. The first thing was about Carol. Second thing was about me. So I was 55 years old at the time. I'm 58 now. So I was 55 years old. Had been married for 30 years. So kind of do a little back of the envelope math. God willing, and I use those words literally, I may still have another 30 ahead of me. So I'm not even halfway done yet. All right, that's not bad. For the first time in my adult life, I had virtually no obligations and responsibilities. Heck, I was barely responsible for myself. Carol was in heaven. Blair, the oldest, was out of college and doing her thing and setting pace on her life. Gotten a great setup for our twins. So their caregiving was already being taken care of, and I was their guardian, but I didn't have to do the heavy lifting anymore. So they're basically set up. So the first time I have no responsibilities or obligations, and I could quite literally do whatever I want. And I thought, well, that's not a bad place to be. I mean, how often do you find yourself where you can literally do whatever you want? And I thought, okay, what exactly am I upset about? Carol's doing great, and I can kind of go do whatever I want. That doesn't happen very often. The $1 million question, and it's still to be answered. And spending a Monday evening with Dom may be part of the answer. Is what does God want me to do with this opportunity that's been presented? Okay. Coming out of that, and what do you want to do? I have thought about writing a book. Many people have told me to. Maybe we need to write a book. And that's where God's Plan, Our Circus kind of came to crystallize. Didn't get the title until it was done, but that's where we started thinking about it. And I wrote the book. The book is a humor and faith-based story, leveraging off my life and the craziness of our family, both raising Paige and Mia, the challenges there, Carol's illness, the challenge that, her passing away, and then coming after that. And so there's a lot of humor in it. The true comic relief is the last chapter, which is the joy of dating in your 50s. That's a totally different line of thinking. Dating in 2020, 2021, 22 was very different than dating in the last time I had a date was 1986. A first date. Last time I had a first date was in 1986. So the world had changed a little bit on that front. A lot of comic relief relative to that.
Yeah.
But one of the things I included in that chapter, which I did not realize this until actually I had finished writing the book, and I started creating some presentations to take to different groups about the story on different topics, and I included a conversation in the dating section of a conversation I had with a woman one day. I was sitting at a table at a restaurant, and she knew me. She came over, sat down, and said, "So Clay, tell me your story." I'm like, "Oh my goodness, this will take a while." I gave her the highlights, and she, when I was finished, she said, "Well, Clay, we all have experiences and challenges, baggage and drama." I thought about that for a second. And I said, well, yes and no. We all have experiences and challenges. That's absolutely true. Can't get away from that. All of us have experiences and challenges. But baggage and drama are optional. It's all in how you choose to look at your life. And happiness is a choice. And that, when I kind of wrote that into the book, I remembered having the conversation. I wrote that in the book, and I went, you know what? That's really the sub-story of the whole thing, or the umbrella story, is that happiness is a choice. So many things happen in our lives that we have no control of. We think we're in control of things. We ain't in control of crap. Stuff happens. Now, God's in control of it, but as I mentioned earlier, I have been blessed with some very unique challenges. And when I say that, some people look at me like I'm got three heads. That a challenge is a blessing? Absolutely. A blessing is anything that God's involved in. Okay. So when most people think blessings, they think happy stuff. You're like, oh, got a good job, had a nice vacation, kids are wonderful, all that. And that's true. Nothing wrong with that. But sometimes God, here's the thing. I tell people this all the time. God is smarter than we are, and we need to get over it. In his job, part of his gig is he gets to be God, and he gets to allow things to happen. Sometimes he may cause it. Sometimes he may just knowingly something's going to play out that we don't like. And like I described before, we may get mad at him. We don't understand it. We think we're being picked on. We don't like it at all. But God in his sovereignty is deciding to let that play out. That means he's involved in it. That means it's a blessing. Because even though we don't like it at the time, there's a bigger picture involved that he gets, that he understands that we don't. And that's the whole basis of faith, is having faith that God's got it, even if we don't understand it and even if we don't like it. And God is, his shoulders are strong enough to handle us being mad at him. He really can, he can handle that fine. So that's kind of where that whole happiness is a choice, in that stuff happens. And it can, and in many times it's things that God is allowing to play out. Things happen that we don't like. We cannot control that. What we can control is how we respond to it. And faith in God, for me, is very, very critical. We look at our experiences, we look at where we get our strengths from. All those come into play, and that defines us in really in who we are. We're not defined by the challenge. Some people say they're defined by the challenge. No, you're not. You're not defined by the challenge. We're defined by how we respond to the challenge. That's kind of what the whole theme of the book is looking at, hey, here's a bunch of craziness that happened to this one screwball family in Texas. And it was about how we chose to respond to it. One of the things that I described in there was a conversation I had with my now son-in-law when he told me he was going to marry my daughter. And we had a long conversation. We talked about faith. We talked about all kinds of stuff. And one of the things I described in the book was that Carol and I, we had some pretty intense challenges, as I just described, between our children, between our health and just general life. Just add on to those just the regular challenges that every married couple and every family have, right? So we had plenty of them. I used to tell people, well, we're not Italian, but we act like it. I mean, we could go at it, man. We could. We called it verbal diarrhea. For 10 minutes, we'd get the verbal diarrhea flowing. We get all out, and then as soon as that was over, we're like, hey, you want to go to a movie? I mean, it was just handled it. But through all the challenges, and I had some job challenges. I've been laid off from my job twice, 2 different positions. We had financial challenges a couple times in our marriages, and then in our marriage, and then challenges with the family and so on. But through all of that, we got through it and survived well, and we're blessed with the challenge, and then blessed coming out of the challenges. So the good things that happened after all that, none of them were deserved. Some people will say, well, Clay, you've been through a lot of challenges. You deserve something positive. No, I don't. No, what I deserve is not to be with God in heaven, but luckily Jesus Christ has taken care of that for me. Okay, and my faith in him. So I don't deserve anything positive. But my compass through all of the challenges and so on was centered on 3 things. Number 1 was always remembering that God was with us, even in the hardest times. And I think for everyone, it's easy to remember that God's with us in the good times, because we're thanking God. You're getting the positive blessings, right? But the challenge is remembering that God's with us even in the hardest times. That was number 1. Number 2 was always appreciate what we had. No matter how much or how little, always appreciate what we had. And number 3 was, and I can only speak for my own family, so this is not a commentary on anybody else, but only this is speaking for my own family, my own self. Number 3 was, I was never going to abandon my family, ever. And but keeping my compass on those 3 things enabled us to survive and to prosper, ultimately in the end. So it's worked well. I mean, the challenges are there. One of the way I end the book is that you shouldn't tell the ending for people who've read it yet. But I'm gonna give you a peek under the covers. I'm gonna tell you what the last paragraph is. No, the last paragraph is, every day I find something to appreciate. Every day I find something to appreciate, and I let people know how important they are. It's made all the difference. That's how the book ends. And it's really that perspective is what enabled us to get through so much. We appreciated the fact that Paige and Mia were in schools with teachers who were very well trained to work with people with severe disabilities. Some parents would be upset that they had to be in special ed. We were delighted that there was a special ed, because you know what, Dom? 50 years ago, there was no special ed, okay? So you see, you look for blessings. Yeah, we were at one point in a church that we loved that did not have a special needs ministry, and basically said, if you want to keep coming back to the church, you need to be with your children the whole time. That broke my wife's heart. But we discovered there are churches with special needs ministries. We were very blessed for that. And I can sit here and name 50 things, across the board. So appreciation is a really big deal. And one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot recently, so I'll share this up with you, is so often people talk about their expectations. Here's what our expectations are for each other, or whatever the case may be. Expectations for children. I really never had expectations for my children, including my oldest one, because my father's only had really one expectation for me, and that was to be respectful of other people. And we should expect to be respected. That's not unreasonable. The only expectation should be respect. Beyond that, everything's kind of up for grabs, right? But so often we set all these lists of expectations, and I thought, you know what? Instead of worrying about what we expect from others, what if we put that energy into showing appreciation for whatever it is they bring and whoever they are? If we showed appreciation instead of worrying about our expectations, my goodness, I think that the world would be a much better place, and our stress levels would go down so much more. Think about how so much stress comes from people not living up to our expectations. Well, if you didn't have any expectations and you just appreciated them for who they are and what they bring, funny how your stress level will go down as a result of that.
There you go. It's right indeed. Keeping it light, I bet. It'd be a lot lighter that way too. It's like, hey, expect nothing. It's like, yeah, expect a lot out of people. Like, hey, like sometimes,
it's funny. A great way to learn that is if that comes in really clear on dating apps. So when you're meeting people on a dating app, and you have these great messages. So you message back and forth in the app. Oh wow, she sounds pretty interesting. Oh, okay, we got that in common. Then you start texting back and forth. Oh, okay, all right, good. You're getting to know each other, kind of know about the family. You're getting the stories all good. Then you get all hyped up, right? And you go to that first meeting, and that crazy thing called chemistry. Then maybe it may not show up on that date, and it's like I mean, you're polite. I mean, hopefully, I've heard some stories about people who are not polite. One of my greatest surprises when I got into the dating world is learning how Dom, a lot of our brothers and brethren in the male side, even the Christian ones, are letting the species down through a lot of really bad behavior. And I've heard some crazy stories from ladies about guys who, you can see, even Christian guys who just do stuff. What would possess? And I'm going to keep the show PG. But what in the world would possess a guy to take a picture of part of his body and text it to a woman unsolicited? Where in a guy's thought process does this come up as a good idea? Okay. I have heard so many stories about that and other types of things that I'm like, well, heck, here I am trying to differentiate myself from the pack, dating apps are marketing. You're trying to market yourself. There's a lot of competition out there. Well, it dawned on me, the easiest thing to do is just don't be a jerk. And the way you don't be a jerk is don't do jerky things. And no, it's amazing. But my point being that you get in this whole dating app thing, you get your expectations high, and then you meet somebody, you're like, all right, well, after a lot of darn it and disappointments, I kind of took a new philosophy or new approach, which was, you know what, to the point, if I've gotten to the point of gonna take a lady out for dinner, which I've done a lot, and you kind of get to know her, then there's a basis that she's a good person. Okay, so the worst thing that's going to happen is two nice people had a nice dinner. If I just approach it with really no expectations and just go in it eyes open, okay, may not be the one, that's okay. So don't have those high expectations. It makes for a much nicer evening. Okay. And who knows, you may get a friendship or something out of it on the other end. In the book, when I talk about the joys of dating in your 50s, I said I dated with intention. I was Clay 2.0. That's what I launched in the Tom Thumb grocery store. Was Clay 2.0, kind of the new life. I didn't know what God had planned for me, but I was pretty sure He didn't want me to do it alone. So I'm going to go out and find a new partner, right? And the only way to do that is you got to put yourself out there. Did I mention there was a pandemic going on during this period? So try dating during a pandemic. That's another unique thing. And also, I had met Carol when I was 21. She was 20. We were joined at the hip for 33 years. So I never really dated that much prior to Carol. So here I am, 55, starting to date, and I've got the dating intellect of a 17-year-old. Okay, from an experience standpoint, I literally have no idea what I'm doing, throwing the whole dating app thing and whatnot. So you start getting into that. And I was dating a lot of people. No, I mean, it's a numbers game. You got to meet people. So I moved to an entertainment district here in Plano, Texas, called Legacy West. So I lived above kind of the fountains of Legacy West. I had a little Bellagio show going on every night down below me. So, tons of people all over the place. It's like a 4-block area of Manhattan dropped in the middle of Plano, Texas. And so I went out every night, and I rarely dined alone. So do the math. So I was meeting a lot of people. I said my credit card statement looked like I was taking every unattached woman in North Texas out for a nice meal. So, so part of it was, I was wanting to meet the next, say Ms. Boatright, but the next partner, the next permanent partner. But in hindsight, this was soon after Carol had passed away. I was also trying to fill the loneliness void. And that was tough. And I filled it with lots of dinners, but I had lots of nice conversations. I guess in hindsight, and I look back at my mindset then, I just wanted to have nice people to have dinner with, somebody to talk to. Oh, if she happens to be pretty, well, that's not a bad thing. And if maybe we go out a few more times and a relationship develops, well, that's definitely not a bad thing, right? So I had that going on. But then, like I mentioned, as time went on, I started reevaluating the whole process and my own thought process, and just relieved myself of a lot of stress by just not having high expectations and just appreciate people for who they are.
There we go, indeed. Well, and speaking of dinners, my goodness, if your wonderful book, God's Plan, Our Circus, if that book were a food, what would it be and why?
Ooh, what food would it be? I'm going to say it's going to be a really good bowl of spaghetti. Okay. It's going to glue to your ribs. There are going to be some points. There's going to be some points where you just can't take little bites. You're going to have to twirl it on your fork a little bit and figure out how to take a bite out of it and not get any of the sauce on your shirt. Going to have some good meatballs in there that are going to come as a surprise. Those meatballs are going to have some spice to it. Okay. So it's got a little spice thrown in there, but at the end of the day, you're going to be pretty well satisfied. And I've had several people make this comment to me about the book. They said there are points where they laughed, there were points where they cried, and there were points where they had to put it down and walk away because it hit too close to home. I'm like, you know what? I will take that. I appreciate people framing it back that way. It's a fairly easy read. I've had some people maybe have read it over the course of several days, several nights. I talked to one person who read it in one day. I think she has very fast reading skills to be able to have knocked it down in one day. But it'll get you thinking. It will push your boundaries in terms of perspective, which was the whole point. Nowhere in the book. I have one chapter I call it the top 5 things for families with disabilities, where I strongly urge people to do these 5 things. But that's very specific to families with disabilities. Outside of that, nowhere in the book do I tell anybody what to do. A quote was given to me one time, which I thought was great, was the word should does not appear anywhere in the book. And the reason for that is nobody likes to be should on. Okay, nobody likes to be, hey, you should do this. You don't know that. You don't know their walk. You don't know their situation. So I never tell anybody what they should do. What I do, though, is say, hey, here's the challenges that we had or the craziness. And Many of them were funny. I said, here's what we encountered. Here's the process we went through to evaluate different things. And here's what we did. And what I hope people take from that is like, oh, wow, we've been through that as well. Or maybe not the same thing, but been through something similar. And by me describing what we went through on an evaluation process, they can do that same process for themselves and then land on whatever conclusion and step forward is that they is right for their family. And that's the whole point, is the really the point is to help change people's perspectives from, say, being sad or distraught and depressed on whatever their situation may be, but to look at it and find the upside that there is happiness because God is with you, even in those challenges. So God's with you, and there's happiness where God trails. So find that. And in that process of changing our attitude, that then opens our minds and the ability to see options that we would not have seen otherwise. And if my book can kind of help plant some seeds of those options, then it's adding value. Someone asked me one time, hey, Clay, do you know where power comes from? I said, no. And they said, well, some people think power comes from money and so on. He said, no, it doesn't come from money. He said, power comes from having options. Okay. Now, people with money can buy options. So that's real, but it's not the money, it's the options. And so often there are options that we have in our lives and our situations that really don't cost anything. But when you think about people who are powerless feel like they don't have any options. They're stuck. That's why they are powerless. They're stuck in a situation they can't get out of. But if we can help people through either changing attitude or providing information or knowledge that they may not already have, if we can help them see options that they didn't know were there before, suddenly they feel much better about themselves. Because even if there are options that they choose not to take, so they may choose to stay in their current situation, which is fine, that's their right. Just knowing that they're choosing to do that gives them a level of control over their lives that didn't have otherwise, because they're choosing that. Because they now are choosing it among options that they didn't know they had. So that's one of the things that I'm hoping the book does, is that it triggers ideas in people's minds to see options that they would not have had before, or that they were not aware of before, and thus get a sense of power that comes from that as they work through whatever that challenge is that they have.
That's what I'm talking about, indeed. That's right. Got to work through them challenges, indeed. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. That's why they have many things in the circus. That's right, indeed. It's more than a bearded lady and an elephant, y'all. That's right, indeed. There may be a ring of fire somewhere.
That's right. And that bearded lady's probably on a dating app somewhere, so you better be careful. I probably met her. No, it's all good, and we talk about the title. I am very pleased that we landed on that, and because I think it resonates with so many people, and people, particularly believers. So we know God has a plan. We know it intellectually, but then when we see the chaos of our given day, we don't necessarily feel it in our heart. We know it's in our head, but we don't feel it in our heart, and which is very real. I mean, we're all like that. So if nothing else, if the title, I think, can resonate with a lot of people going, yeah, I don't even know what the story's about, but I got it. It's like God's got a plan, but I'm executing a circus. And somehow those related. So everybody, I think, can relate to that to some extent, even if they don't know my particular story behind it.
Oh, I resonated with it instantly. I'm like, you know what? That is so darn true. It's like, yep, kind of reminds that classic saying that, hey, man plans and God laughs, right?
Well, absolutely right. No, and it's funny you would say that on the back of the book, where it has a description of what's inside. Actually, my publisher put this on there. I thought she did a good job. She said, "You make plans and God laughs, right?" And it's thank goodness he passed that sense of humor along to author Clay Boatright. And she goes on to describe the various challenges that I've taken us through tonight. So that's exactly right. God's plan is going to supersede ours. And I think so often we forget that God is not our celestial bellhop. He's not on our payroll. Now, does he love us? Absolutely. Does he hear our prayers? Absolutely. But his job is not to do what we tell him to. Okay. Our job is to listen to him, observe, pray, listen, and then feel led to respond accordingly. And I know that is much easier to say than do. It's significantly easier to say than do, particularly when we're going through tough times. But I think so often when we're in a challenging time that we did not sign up for, and we pray to God and we ask for a very specific outcome and we don't get it, it's easy to think, well, God's mad at us, or God doesn't love us, or whatever. Absolutely not true at all. He's just allowing us to go through a difficult challenge because it's either part of a greater plan, and that greater plan may be to help us grow in some way and mold us in some way that we don't realize at the time. Again, that's the whole basis of faith. Go through that.
Indeed, heck indeed. Faith is where it's at. Faith is where it's at, indeed. So, my goodness, coming down to the magical questions every guest gets to receive, and that is if you were to wake up tomorrow and you were 25 again, but you're still in the current year, what advice would you give to yourself?
So if I woke up tomorrow and I was 25 years old with, I guess, the experience and knowledge that I've got now, I would immediately pull up the covers and go back to sleep. That's exactly what I would do. I'm like, no. The I'd say, again, from the Department of God has a sense of humor. That's where that comes from. Number one would be get ready, because we have no idea what's going to come up, right? So just be ready for anything. And as cliche-ish as it sounds, I hate cliches, but cliches are often based on some level of truth or wisdom. The old don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. Even the big stuff can be small stuff. And because there were times I look back and I would lose so much sleep over some things that 6 months later were completely irrelevant and unbelievably irrelevant. So I would kind of pass that along. Another area I've been blessed with is and I alluded to it a moment ago. Compared to most men you meet, I never talk about my work. And some people think I'm in the mafia. I am not. If I was, that probably could have fixed a few problems I've had along the way. But no, and the reason I don't is I'm not ashamed of it. I was in the basic sales and marketing analytics business for the food industry. Okay. But, so I paid the bills and nothing wrong with that, but I didn't get my identity from that. I got my identity from the things we've been talking about tonight. And I probably tell myself, don't feel the need to get your identity from your employment. Some people do, and that's great. I'm not saying that's a negative, but it's not a requirement. So God can use us in many ways that do not have to have a financial tie-in to them. And I think particularly with men, we have a challenge getting our head wrapped around that, because so often we get our identity from our jobs. Something else that we talk about, the 25-year-old self, and it triggered a conversation that I actually had with my father when I was 25 years old. And I share this in the book. So Carol and I got married, and a year later, we were born and raised Memphis, Tennessee, both of us. So a year later, I got a job offer in St. Louis, and I took it, and we moved to St. Louis. And about 6 months into the job, I'm like, oh boy, this was not a good move. The job was not what I thought it was going to be. So I was visiting my parents one time in Cincinnati, and I asked my dad. I said, Dad, this job's not working out the way I thought it would. Do you think I made a mistake in taking it? Now, my father was a greatest generation, World War II, Depression era guy, right? Didn't talk a lot, but was pretty wise when he did. So I asked him this question: hey, Dad, do you think I made a mistake in taking this job? And he looked at me like I had three heads. He was like, of course you made the right decision. He said, you were presented with an opportunity. You weighed the pros and the cons. You prayed about it, and you made a decision that at that moment was the right decision for your family. Now, as time moves on, if the situation changes or you get new information along the way. If things change, then you can make a new decision, but never second guess yourself and never do what ifs, because the decision you made at the time was absolutely the right decision because it was the decision you made. Again, if things change, you make a new decision, but never second guess yourself. And that advice resonated with me so deeply, and I've carried that through my entire life, in that I don't second guess myself and I do not do what ifs. And that's so often we're tempted to do that. We sit there and go, oh man, something hasn't worked out right, or this great plan, the plan that I created, we don't know if it was God's plan, but this plan that I created, it didn't work out the way I wanted to. What if I had turned left instead of right? What if I had done A instead of B, or whatever the case is? So we create the scenario of, oh, what if I had done this differently, then all these great things would have tumbled out and my life would be so much better and things would be so much easier. Well, we forget that bad stuff can happen on that other road as well, that whole what if road. Okay. We don't think about that when we're doing that what if. But there's also a psychological term for that utopic, wonderful what if world that we create in our brains. It's called a fantasy. It's not real. That's why it's totally unproductive to do it. What's much more productive is to look at the situations that we are presented with right now. Don't get sucked into the muck. Look at it from an opportunity standpoint. Look at it as, how is God molding me or training me or working with my family, or what are the blessings? Your house gets blown away in a tornado. How often have we seen this on television? House gets blown away in a tornado. The reporter's talking to the owners. They say, oh man, how do you feel? 9 times out of 10, they say, we are just so grateful that everybody got out okay. That's the right attitude. They couldn't affect that tornado coming down the street. That tornado was coming, right? What they can control is how they choose to look at it. And they are so grateful and they appreciate that they got out of it alive. That's the kind of attitude that may not be on that magnitude of a scale, but most of us can apply that every single day of our lives in some way. That's what we need to focus on, and not get caught up in this, oh, woe is me, what if I had done something different? Well, you didn't, so get over it. You made the decision it was the right decision because it was the decision you made at the time. Quit second guessing yourself, get over it, and move forward.
But my goodness, so speaking of movement, my goodness, folks need to move forward by copying some copies of your book and keeping up with your journey. So for those who need to do just that and more, what's the best way for folks to do so?
Well, the best way to find the book is on Amazon.com. So Amazon or Barnes and Noble. I also have it on my website, clayboatright.com. That's ClayBoatright, clayboatright.com. So you can get it through me, you can get it off of Amazon, get it off Barnes and Noble. It's called God's Plan, Our Circus. So write that into the subject line, God's Plan, Our Circus, or my name, Clay Boatright, and it'll come up, and it'll be a good read. I think you'll enjoy it.
That's what I'm talking about, indeed. So there you go, folks. That's right, indeed. It's going to be a roller coaster of humor, inspiration, motivation, and especially for those faith-based believers, indeed. Heck, maybe even provide some tools and ideas for those maybe going through similar situations where they have children or relatives with autism. Indeed, may get some thoughts and some ideas you may not even considered. Indeed, just hear from someone who's actually been through that situation, how they're now on this side of the story. So my goodness, so cop some copies of Clay's books and share it with your friends, family, cat, dog, penguin. Heck, that's right indeed. If you find a camel and it's on a wheelchair, definitely get the book for that camel indeed. That's right indeed. That's right indeed. Because it's definitely our circus indeed. Because when Jesus takes that wheel and it's your rear wheel, you know you weren't supposed to go in that direction. Indeed. So before Jesus takes the rest of the wheels, to keep us from going in the wrong direction. Any parting words before we close up shop?
I'm laughing because in the book I talk about part of my midlife crisis was getting a car that only has three wheels, has two in the front and one on the back. So as you're talking about when Jesus takes that rear wheel, I'm like, and in the Vanderhall, that really gets fun.
If you're hearing this part of the episode, that means you're one cool individual. Thanks a bunch for tuning in, and if you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to share it with at least one other person in your network. Bonus points for 3. And be sure to check out the backlog too while you're at it, because there are hundreds of wonderful episodes to choose from as well.